He worked at the funeral home that handled Tupac Shakur's body, and what he saw inside the bag was so disturbing, so impossible, that it made him quit on the spot. This isn't a rumor. This isn't a headline. This is what one man witnessed with his own eyes. And it left him shaken for the rest of his life. Because when you're standing face to face with a legend the world swears is still alive, and you see something inside that body bag move, you don't forget it. He was just another young worker at the funeral home, learning the rhythms of death. The smell of harsh chemicals that never truly left his clothes. The squeak of gurney wheels rolling down long tiled hallways. The way silence clung to every corner like a living thing. It had all started to feel routine, like a rhythm he could almost predict. Day after day, he told himself that death was manageable, that if you repeated the motions enough times, it would lose its sting. But death has a way of reminding you it's never routine. That reminder came one night with a single phone call. The phone's ring cut through the office like a scream in the dark. It startled him so badly he nearly dropped the clipboard he was holding. His supervisor answered, his voice low, but there was something in the way he said hello. Something sharp, trembling, urgent. The young worker leaned closer without meaning to, as if his body knew this was no ordinary call. He only caught fragments. The words urgent, secure, ready within the hour. Then the line went dead. When his supervisor turned, his face was pale, unreadable. "Clear the prep room," he ordered. "We've got a VIP coming in." The words slammed into the young worker's chest. A VIP. In a funeral home, that could mean only two things: someone famous or someone dangerous. And neither possibility sat well. He froze for a moment, his breath stuck in his throat. What kind of person needs secrecy in death? Who needs a prep room cleared at midnight with no warning? Questions rattled in his head like loose bones, but no answers came. Within the hour, the parking lot outside was crawling with movement. He peered through the blinds and counted at least 4 black SUVs lined up tight, their engines still humming. Men in dark suits stood in the shadows, their posture rigid, their eyes scanning the street like soldiers guarding a perimeter. No one spoke. Not to each other, not to the funeral staff, not even to break the tension. The young worker's skin prickled. He had handled dozens of bodies, and though some were tragic, some violent, some gruesome, never had the air felt like this. Never had the air felt thick with something he couldn't name. Inside, every staff member kept their heads down, but their eyes said what no one dared speak aloud. This was different. Something bigger than death itself was about to roll through their doors. When the vehicle's doors finally opened, the silence only deepened. 2 men wheeled in a stretcher draped in a heavy black bag sealed tight. The wheels clattered across the tile, echoing in the hallway like gunfire, each sound making the worker's pulse kick harder in his ears. He tried to steady his hands, gripping the edge of a counter as the stretcher passed. The bag looked like all the others, but it wasn't. He could feel it. Even before they set it on the steel table, his knees felt weak, like they might give out beneath him. It wasn't just the weight of death pressing down on him. Death he could handle. He had handled it before. But this was heavier. This was the weight of something he didn't understand yet. The weight of a secret being dragged into his world, a secret that demanded silence, obedience, and fear. He forced himself to look at the table, to stare at the sealed bag, but every instinct inside him screamed not to. It felt like staring into a storm before it breaks, the moment when everything is too still, too calm, too wrong. For a second, he thought of walking out, just leaving before he saw what was inside. But his feet were rooted to the floor, and some part of him, the part that would later curse itself forever, needed to know. And so he stayed. The bag sat there under the fluorescent lights, black and silent, gleaming faintly as if mocking the room's hush. The young worker's chest tightened. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Every second stretched into minutes, and every minute stretched into eternity. And when the zipper was finally tugged down, when the truth was about to be revealed, he felt the ground vanish beneath him, because he had no idea whose body he was about to see. And he had no way of knowing that what waited inside would unravel everything he thought he knew about life and about death. The stretcher sat in the center of the prep room, the black bag gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light, the kind of light that washed every shadow away, yet somehow made the room feel darker, colder. The room was silent, too silent. So silent it felt like even the air itself had frozen, holding its breath. The young worker's palms were slick with sweat inside his gloves. His hands shook as he reached forward, fingers brushing the cold zipper. He paused. He couldn't bring himself to pull it yet. Not with everyone watching. Not with his heart beating like a war drum in his chest. Every sound around him was suddenly amplified. The hum of the lights above that usually blended into nothingness now roared like electricity coursing through his veins. The faint buzz of an old wall clock, ticking away seconds that felt like years. And worst of all, the echo of his own pulse in his ears, pounding louder and louder, drowning everything else. He glanced at the others in the room. No one spoke. No one dared to. Their faces were blank masks of professionalism, but their eyes betrayed them. Wide, shifting, tense. They were just as afraid to see what was inside that bag as he was. And in that moment, he realized something chilling. If even the veterans were scared, then this wasn't just another job. The zipper finally moved. It started small, a sharp metallic rasp tearing through the suffocating silence like a blade. He froze. The sound rang in his head too loud, like the room itself had flinched. He swallowed hard, tried again. The zipper slid down slowly, inch by inch. Every inch revealed more weight pressing onto his chest, twisting his stomach tighter, like something deep inside already knew what he was about to see and wanted to run. But his hands didn't stop. They couldn't. The bag peeled open, and then there he was. The face hit him like a blow. The cheekbones, the jawline, the tattoos etched into skin that once seemed untouchable. Features he had only ever seen in posters, in music videos, on television screens, but never like this, never this still. It was Tupac Shakur. The name slammed through his mind like thunder. The man whose voice had rattled the world. The poet of rage and pain. The legend who spoke of death like it was waiting at the corner and of immortality as though he already owned it. Millions had sworn he could never die. Millions had whispered he was still alive, hiding, planning, watching. And yet, here he was, cold, silent, motionless. The young worker's breath hitched in his throat. His vision blurred at the edges. He felt the blood drain from his face until he was sure he might collapse right there on the tile. Because he wasn't just looking at a body, he was staring into the heart of a myth. For a long moment, He couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't think. His mind replayed everything he'd ever heard about Tupac, the lyrics that seemed to predict his own end, the interviews where he spoke of resurrection, the endless conspiracy theories claiming he had staged it all. And now, this myth, this man, this living legend lay on a steel table in the back of a quiet funeral home, zipped into a bag like any other soul who had come through their doors. The worker's throat tightened. His hands trembled at his sides. He had prepped bodies before, dozens, but none of them had ever made him feel like this. This wasn't just death. This was sacrilege. This was history collapsing under the weight of reality. And as he stared, a thought gnawed at him, a thought he didn't dare say aloud. Maybe the world had been right. Maybe Tupac wasn't meant to die. Maybe something about this moment was wrong. The silence pressed harder. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. His own heartbeat thundered in his ears like a warning drum. He glanced at his supervisor, at the others, searching for confirmation, for reassurance, for anything. But their faces were stone. Their eyes avoided his. They knew. And yet they said nothing. His chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. He wanted to speak, to say something, to ask how this could be real. But the words never came. His lips parted, then closed. His voice was gone. He looked back down at Tupac's face, pale and still under the cruel light, and something inside him cracked. The myth was real. The legend was human. And yet the silence screamed louder than any of his music ever had. Because silence is deceptive. Silence hides what you're not ready to hear. And this silence wasn't going to last long. His gloves snapped on with a sound that felt too loud in the quiet room. The snap cracked through the silence like a gunshot, echoing in his head long after it was over. He told himself to breathe, to steady his hands, to treat this like any other preparation. He'd done this before. He knew the motions, the steps, the rhythm. But as he stared at the still form on the table, he knew this wasn't any other body. This was Tupac. The thought alone made his knees weak. His hands hovered above the table for too long, frozen in place. Every time he finally reached forward, every time the tips of his gloved fingers brushed the skin, it didn't feel like flesh. It felt like trespassing. It felt like he was disturbing history, crossing a line that should never have been crossed. The others worked beside him, quiet, mechanical. They wiped, adjusted, prepared, their faces locked in masks of detachment. To them, maybe this was just another procedure. To him, it was unthinkable. He tried to copy their rhythm, but every movement felt heavy, unnatural. His hands trembled as they brushed against the tattoos, the familiar lines of ink that had once been alive with meaning. They weren't just marks, they were stories, lyrics, fire burned into skin. Now they were still, but still defiant, like even death couldn't erase them. And that's when the music came back. Not from the speakers, not from the room, from inside his own mind. Lyrics he had grown up hearing came flooding back, pounding in his skull like echoes. Words about death, about fate, about enemies and friends, about immortality. Words that had felt like entertainment when he was younger, but now, under this sterile light, felt like prophecy. They echoed off the walls, off the steel table, bouncing around the room until he swore Tupac himself was speaking them to him. Not as a recording, not as a memory, as if his voice was here, right now, filling the silence. The young worker's throat went dry. His breaths grew short, shallow. The air was thicker now, like it had weight, like every inhale pressed harder against his chest. He had been in prep rooms before, but never had the air itself felt hostile, suffocating, alive. He glanced down again. His eyes traced Tupac's face, pale and still under the fluorescent light. He kept asking himself, is this really him? Could a man this alive, this electric, really be gone? Could the fire in his words, the heat in his voice, simply be reduced to silence? Or was the world right? Was everyone right when they said legends like Tupac don't die? The worker's hands shook harder now. Every brush of his glove against Tupac's skin felt wrong, forbidden, like he was trespassing into a place no human had any right to go. He felt like an intruder in a holy temple, performing a ritual he didn't understand. His stomach twisted tighter with every passing second, his body screaming to stop, to step away, to leave. But he didn't. He couldn't. Something compelled him forward, even as fear chewed at his insides. And then, just when he thought he was finally steadying himself, just when he thought he had pushed the fear back enough to finish the job, it happened. A sound, so faint he almost dismissed it. A shuffle, a whisper of fabric. He froze, his hands suspended mid-motion. The room seemed to lean into the silence, pressing down on him, his ears strained, begging for it to happen again. And it did. This time it was clearer. A ripple in the bag. A tremor so subtle it might have been missed, but not by him. He saw it. He knew what he saw. The fabric had shifted. He stumbled back a half step, his breath catching in his chest. His heart slammed so hard he could feel it in his throat. His mind clawed at explanations. It's nothing. It's natural. It's gas. It's air. It's reflex. Anything. Anything but what it looked like. But denial only lasted seconds, because his eyes were locked on the bag. His body was frozen in place, and he could feel it in his bones. That wasn't nothing. That was movement. The room stayed silent. The others didn't seem to notice, or maybe they refused to. Their heads stayed down, their hands moving as if on autopilot, like machines trying to finish the job. But he couldn't move. He couldn't think. All he could do was stare. A sound, a shuffle, a ripple. The bag wasn't still. The bag wasn't finished. The bag wasn't done moving. At first, he told himself it was nothing, a trick of the light, his imagination playing games with him in the silence. He forced himself to breathe in and out, slow and steady, whispering in his own head like a desperate prayer. Body shifts sometimes. It's natural. Gas escapes. Muscles twitch. It happens. It happens. He repeated it again and again, clinging to the thought like a drowning man clings to a rope, hoping that if he said it enough times, he might believe it, hoping the words could push back the storm rising inside him. But then it happened again. This time, there was no mistaking it. The shuffle was louder, clearer, the sound of fabric straining against pressure from within. His eyes locked onto the bag, wide and unblinking, terrified to miss the next moment, terrified to see it and yet unable to look away. He froze, every muscle in his body locked tight, his arms heavy, his legs numb. His breath caught in his throat and refused to move, as though his lungs themselves had betrayed him. And in that long second, the entire room seemed to tilt. the air warping, the walls bending closer. He wasn't alone with a body anymore. He was trapped with a secret. And then, the moment that shattered him, the chest rose. Slowly. So slowly it could have been imagined. But it wasn't. He saw it. He felt the bag lift, just slightly, just enough to mimic the impossible motion of lungs filling with air. His heart slammed so hard against his ribs it hurt. His vision blurred, blinking hard to make sense of what he had just witnessed. No, it couldn't be. No, it wasn't real. But when he leaned closer, when his ear caught the faintest sound, his blood turned to ice, because he swore he heard it. A sound low and raspy, buried under fabric. A breath fighting its way out from the dark. The room vanished around him. There was no prep table, no lights, no coworkers. There was only the bag and the terrifying possibility that it wasn't just a bag anymore. His chest heaved with panic, his throat tight, his body screaming to run. But his feet wouldn't move, his hands wouldn't respond. He was caught between flight and paralysis, stuck in the most dangerous place of all, the middle. He told himself again, this wasn't real. This wasn't happening. Science had explanations. He'd heard them before. The body releases gas, the diaphragm shifts, muscles spasm. They were trained to ignore it, trained to treat it like routine. But his heart refused to believe it. Because this wasn't gas. This wasn't a twitch. This wasn't some lifeless reflex. This was something else. Something deeper. Something alive. And in that moment, staring at the rise and fall of the chest beneath the bag, he felt reality bend. He realized the myth might be more powerful than the truth. The world outside that room had spent years arguing whether Tupac was really dead. People whispered he'd escaped, that he was in Cuba, that he was planning a return. Most had laughed it off, called it fantasy. But here, right now, standing inches away from the body everyone swore was lifeless, he wasn't laughing. He wasn't doubting. He was living the nightmare of seeing the myth breathe in front of him. His heart hammered so violently he thought it might burst. The walls seemed to press inward, closing the room into a box. The fluorescent lights flickered once, buzzing like angry wasps. Sweat rolled down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he couldn't wipe it away. He couldn't break eye contact with the bag, terrified that if he looked away for even a second, he might miss the next impossible movement. And then, it happened again. A shudder, a tremor, subtle, but there. The bag rippled like something inside had twitched against it. He gasped so loudly that one of the other workers glanced at him. Their eyes met for half a second. The veteran's stare was blank, cold, unflinching, and then he turned back to his task, as if nothing had happened. The young worker's stomach dropped. They knew. They had to know. But no one wanted to acknowledge it. No one wanted to admit what was happening. Silence was safer. Pretending was easier. But he couldn't pretend. The sound of his own blood rushed in his ears, drowning out everything else. His knees threatened to buckle. He was on the edge of breaking apart, his mind unraveling, his grip on reality tearing loose one thread at a time. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not like this. His mouth opened. Words tumbling out in a whisper he could barely recognize as his own voice. It moved, he muttered. I swear it moved. No one answered. No one wanted to. The silence that followed was worse than denial. It was complicity. It was a wall of silence that told him more than words ever could. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't unique. This was something they had all agreed to never speak of. And in that realization, a cold wave swept through him. He wasn't just staring at a legend. He was standing at the edge of something forbidden. Something people had buried deeper than the grave. His vision swam. His lungs burned. He stumbled a step back, gripping the counter to steady himself. His body was screaming at him to leave, to run, to never look back. But his eyes stayed locked on the bag, on the faint rise and fall, on the myth that refused to die. Because the nightmare wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. He stumbled backward from the table, his chest pounding so violently it hurt. His eyes locked on the bag, on the chest that had risen and fallen as if it were fighting the silence. His lungs begged for air, but he couldn't breathe. His throat felt locked shut, his tongue heavy like stone. When he finally managed a sound, it came out broken, trembling. "Something's wrong," he whispered, louder than he meant to. "It moved. I swear it moved." The words cracked through the room like shattering glass. The other staff didn't answer. Their faces tightened. Their hands kept working, but their eyes told the truth. They'd heard him. They'd heard the panic. They just chose silence. His supervisor turned slowly, his jaw tight, his expression carved from stone. The man's voice carried the weight of authority, cold and sharp. "Bodies do that," he snapped. Gas, muscle reflex. "It's nothing. Get back to work." But the young worker shook his head violently, his whole body trembling. His legs threatened to give way, his chest burning with each shallow breath. "No," he stammered, the word breaking in his throat. "No, that wasn't gas. That wasn't a reflex. I heard..." His voice cracked, his lips trembling. "I heard it breathe." The supervisor's eyes narrowed. His glare was sharp enough to cut through steel. "You didn't hear anything." His tone was final, flat, a sentence delivered like a gavel strike. "You didn't see anything. And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut." The silence after those words was suffocating. The young worker's knees buckled as he turned his eyes back to the bag. His heart wanted to believe the supervisor. His brain wanted to cling to science, to training, to the idea that this could be explained away. But his gut screamed the truth. He had seen the chest rise. He had heard the rasp of air. He had felt something no science could explain. And the bag wasn't finished. Every time he glanced at it, he swore he saw the faintest ripple, the barest tremor, as if something inside wasn't done fighting. His eyes blurred with tears he refused to let fall. His vision narrowed until all he could see was that black plastic, that horrible outline. His pulse hammered in his temples like it wanted to break free. Still, he forced himself forward. His supervisor was watching, his coworkers were watching, and he couldn't make a scene. He had to try. He had to keep going. His hands shook uncontrollably as he reached for the bag, trying to help seal it, to finish the ritual, to do what he was paid to do. But the moment his gloved fingers brushed against Tupac's shrouded hand, everything ended. The hand twitched, not a shift, not a spasm, not a natural reflex. It twitched. The jolt was sharp, undeniable. He felt it through the glove like a spark leaping out of the skin. It was as real as his own heartbeat. He yanked his hand back so fast the latex squealed against the fabric. "No!" he gasped, stumbling backward. His voice rose higher, cracking with terror. "No! No! No!" His chest seized as the room spun around him. The supervisor's patience snapped. He slammed a tray onto the counter, the metallic clang exploding in the silence like a gunshot. "Enough!" he barked. "Do your job?" But the worker couldn't. He couldn't take another step toward that table. His whole body was breaking apart, shaking so violently he couldn't control his arms. His gloves burned against his skin like chains. With a desperate motion, he tore them off, ripping them away as though they were cursed. The snap of the latex was final, like the sound of something ending. He stood there, bare hands trembling, his chest heaving, his throat convulsed with sobs he fought to keep down. Words tumbled out of his mouth in broken whispers, frantic and unsteady. I can't do this. Not him, not like this." The supervisor's voice boomed, calling his name, demanding he stop. But he was already gone inside. Something in him had shattered, a piece of him that would never come back. His legs moved on their own, stumbling toward the door. His co-workers turned their heads, eyes wide, but no one reached for him. No one tried to stop him. He could feel their stares stabbing into his back as he pushed through the door, his chest still convulsing with shallow, frantic breaths. The fluorescent hallway light stabbed into his eyes, too bright, too sharp. He leaned against the wall, gasping like a drowning man, his vision swimming. Every step away from that room felt heavy, like dragging a chain, like something inside was trying to pull him back. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. He didn't even bother to collect his things. He didn't ask about his paycheck. He didn't care about explanations, about rumors, about what people would say. He knew one thing and one thing only. He would never set foot in that place again. His career ended in that moment, with a pair of gloves ripped off in terror. But as he stumbled out into the night, gulping the cold air, one truth burned deeper than the panic. Walking out of the funeral home didn't mean leaving Tupac behind. At first, it was little things. A lyric on the radio that cut through him like a blade. Songs he'd heard 1,000 times before suddenly sounded different, heavier, like they were speaking directly to him. A verse about death and resurrection seemed written for him alone. He'd be walking through a store and hear Tupac's voice playing overhead, and instantly his throat would tighten, his palms sweating inside his pockets. The sound followed him everywhere, from passing cars, from strangers' phones, from neighbors' speakers. And each time it happened, his chest locked, his hands shook. The music wasn't just music anymore. It was a reminder, a taunt, as if the songs themselves were mocking what he had witnessed. But then, it grew heavier. Some nights, lying in bed, he swore he could hear whispers in the dark. Not noise, not imagination. Whispers. They came low and urgent, almost too soft to catch, like someone speaking just beyond his ear. He would hold his breath, straining to listen, his heart pounding so loud it nearly drowned them out. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It carried the rhythm of verses he had heard his entire life, the cadence of Tupac, the raw delivery, the tone that could only belong to one man. But the man he heard wasn't supposed to be speaking anymore. He tried to fight it. He drowned the silence with noise, the TV blaring, music blasting, white noise machines humming through the night. But nothing worked. because silence wasn't safe anymore. Silence was the enemy. Silence was when it came. And when it came, there was nothing he could do to stop it. One night, he woke up drenched in sweat, his body trembling as if he had been running in his sleep. His chest rose and fell like he had sprinted miles, though he hadn't moved. His skin prickled with the unmistakable feeling that he wasn't alone. The room was dark, too dark. He sat up slowly, his head pounding, his breath caught halfway between a gasp and a scream. His eyes darted across the room, scanning the corners, the closet, the shadows pooling at the edges of the walls. His heart hammered harder and harder, begging for proof. Proof of what he feared. Proof of what he couldn't explain. But nothing was there. No one was standing over him. No figure, no shadow, nothing. And yet, the sound lingered. A whisper burned into the air, etched into the silence. A whisper so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it, almost, but not quite. 'Cause he heard the words, "I ain't dead yet." The whisper didn't echo like a sound in the room. It echoed inside him. It carved itself into his bones, into his blood, into his soul. The words nearly drove him to madness. They weren't just sounds. They weren't just echoes of a memory. They were a claim, a curse, a statement of truth or of something even darker. They were a reminder that truth and myth had bled together in that prep room, and he would never untangle them again. He sat in the dark, shaking, sweating, clutching at his sheets like they might anchor him to sanity. His mind screamed for logic, for reason, for explanation, but no answer came. Only the whisper, circling him, binding him tighter. He walked out that night and never came back. No resignation letter, no goodbye, no last paycheck, just gone. The job that had once seemed stable, tolerable, almost ordinary, ended in a single heartbeat. He didn't care about money or consequences. All that mattered was getting away from that prep room, from that table, from that bag. But running didn't mean escaping. The funeral home became a place he refused to even drive past. If his errands took him anywhere near that street, he'd take the long way around. He told himself he was free, that he had left it behind. But deep down, he knew the truth. Because the moment he left that room, Tupac didn't stay behind. At first, it was small things. A lyric on the radio that cut through him like a knife. Songs he'd heard 1,000 times before suddenly sounded different, heavier, like they were speaking directly to him. A verse about death and resurrection seemed written for him alone. He'd hear Tupac's voice in a store or blaring from a passing car, and instantly his throat tightened, his palms sweating. The sound followed him everywhere. Then it grew worse. At night, lying in bed, he began hearing whispers in the dark. Not noise, not imagination. Whispers. They came low and urgent, almost too soft to catch, like someone speaking just beyond his ear. He'd hold his breath, straining to listen. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. The cadence of Tupac. The raw delivery. A voice the world had buried, but one he couldn't shut out. He tried to fight it. He turned up the TV. He blasted music. He ran white noise machines until the power bill doubled. But nothing worked. Silence was the enemy. Silence was when it came. And when it came, there was no stopping it. One night, he woke drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as though he had been running. His skin prickled with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. The room was dark, too dark. He sat up slowly, his heart slamming against his ribs. His eyes scanned the shadows. Corners, closet, door, empty. No figure stood there, no intruder. And yet, the sound lingered. A whisper, etched into the silence itself. So faint he almost thought he imagined it, almost. 'Cause he heard the words. "I ain't dead yet." The whisper didn't echo like a sound in the room. It echoed inside him. It carved itself into his bones. The words nearly drove him to madness. They weren't echoes of memory. They were a claim, a curse, a reminder that truth and myth had bled together in that prep room, and he would never separate them again. He sat in the dark, clutching the sheets like they might anchor him to sanity. His mind screamed for reason, but no answer came. Only the whisper, circling him, binding him tighter. He had left the funeral home thinking he had escaped. He thought the horror was locked in that room, sealed in that bag. But in reality, he had only traded one haunting for another. He was no longer bound by the walls of his job. He was bound by something far more powerful. It followed him everywhere, in strangers' cars blasting Tupac's voice, in conversations where lyrics slipped out at the worst moments, in murals on city walls that seemed to stare directly into him. It followed him into his sleep, into the silence of his own bedroom. The worst part wasn't the fear. It wasn't the whispers. It wasn't even the songs that now felt like messages aimed straight at him. The worst part was the question. Because once you see a legend move in the silence of death, once you feel a twitch under your own hand, once you hear a whisper that shouldn't exist, you never stop wondering. He tried to convince himself it was science, post-mortem reflexes, gases, cadaveric spasm. He read every article, memorized every term, but none of the explanations could erase the jolt he had felt in that bag, or the breath he had heard scrape against the dark. He told no one, not his mother who would pray, not friends who would laugh, not a bartender, not a priest. Silence became his only protection. But silence was also when the whispers came. So he lived between two worlds, the world that wanted him to forget and the world that would never let him. He walked the streets late at night, hoping the noise of traffic might drown it out. But even in the chaos of the city, Tupac's voice seemed to slip through. A lyric half heard, a rhythm hidden in footsteps, a whisper hiding between sirens. Sleep came in fragments 10 minutes at a time. He stopped sleeping in his bed. The couch felt safer, though nothing truly was. He'd wake in a panic, heart racing, convinced someone was standing over him, only to find the room empty. But the whisper never left. "I ain't dead yet." He thought about going back, about standing in that room again, staring at the table, forcing himself to see if the bag was truly still. Maybe it would break the spell. Maybe it would end the nightmare, but he couldn't. The thought of those fluorescent lights, the black plastic gleaming under them, was enough to paralyze him. He never set foot near that building again, and so he lived with it. He learned which streets played fewer songs, which stores kept their radios low, how to leave a room when a verse played, how to survive with the haunting always just behind him. But the question never left, because some nights When the city went quiet and he was alone with the dark, the memory came back in full. The stretcher, the bag, the chest rising where no chest should, the twitch of a hand under his palm, the silence splitting open to let a whisper through. He would close his eyes, trembling, his breath shallow, waiting for it to stop. But it never did. The myth had fused with the truth, and now he was trapped between them forever. He wasn't afraid of people calling him crazy. He was afraid of them believing him. Because if they believed, the world would have to admit what he already knew. That once you've seen what he saw, once you've felt the impossible, you can never go back. And you never stop wondering if maybe, just maybe, the legend was never dead at all.